Like if they have a virus or they have, they say they have like strep or something. Now, do they forever have that? Like, is that something that they need or like people have stuff in their childhood and they just assume, oh, well, I haven't had that in decades. Like that's not a threat. But I think we need to understand that our body's managing a lot more than we give it credit for because we don't experience the symptoms of an active virus or an infection. So maybe just clarify that. Like, what are the most common things that people probably have within their bodies because we've all been exposed at some point that you just need to be aware of because it can rear its ugly head at some point in your life based on a triggering event that you experience. What's up, friends? Welcome back to another mini episode. This is a fun one because it's a tandem. I'm doing this with my co-host, Dr. Motley, and we're going to jam. This is I think it'll be a 2-part conversation so that we keep these episodes kind of in bite-sized little pieces for you. But on this specific episode, we're going to talk about the triggers. I'm laughing because I'm finding out all of these triggers, you guys, that Dr. Motley has, like just in normal conversation.
Yes. Yeah. She's finding out the little pet peeves of Dr. Motley that things I don't like. Anyway,
it's fascinating. I think it says a lot when you really get to know someone when you learn their triggers and, their pet peeves, like the things that it just like gets under their skin. Cause they're very small and probably irrelevant things to like most people, but they're like little things that just, they drive you crazy. So anyway, this episode is not going to be on Dr. Motley's triggers, but it is going to be on triggers. And we're going to talk about the different events and exposures in your life that are potentially creating a cascade of reactions or reactivating things that were probably already there to begin with. Because I would venture to say that many of us will have, a flare of a virus, like, for instance, I had a cold sore a couple weeks ago. So we know that is the herpes virus. Like, why did that occur? Because the herpes virus is there. It's living. It's in your tissues. It's dormant. Your immune system is controlling it. But when there's an exposure, there's an event, there's something stressful that happens. Now, all of a sudden, the immune system isn't able to regulate, right? Because it gets more compromised because of stress. And now that virus flares up, becomes active. So we see this. And I have noticed recently just patterns, and I don't know if this has just been in like certain friend groups, but I've seen a lot of people face different health challenges that are really already there. Like they're already present, but it's certain situations and triggers that are creating the response of the virus to come back alive again, to be reactivated. And so I think it's important to understand kind of like where your health is at. Because here's the thing, like if you don't understand why some of these things are showing up, and we'll talk about autoimmune and things like that, because this isn't just dormant viruses. There's a lot of things that kind of we're going to cover here, but I think it's important to realize like you can't start to heal things if you don't know the root of it. And so we talk about root cause, but are we really talking about the root cause of something like an autoimmune disease? Like we just think that, well, we just got to control that autoimmune issue. So that's a long-winded way of saying we're talking about triggers. So we're helping you put the pieces in place so you can understand a little bit bigger. And in this episode, we're going to talk about what those are. And then in part 2, we're going to talk a little bit about what you can do about it. So stay tuned. Make sure you listen into both episodes. Dr. Motley, thanks for joining me. Thanks for being triggered.
Thank you for having me, Court. And let's not go into the realm of pre-rinsing your dishes before you put them into the dishwasher, or making sure that every bite of food or scrap of food is taken off, and doing the job of the dishwashing machine before you actually put it into the dishwashing machine. And I know many of you out there are going to be like, that's true. I do not like doing that, and okay, you guys know that. Number one, numero uno for Motley. That's what we're going. So thanks. I'm really glad to be here. We always had the best time together, and this is going to be a good one. We're going to talk about the triggers and like latent viruses or latent bacteria and any infection that seems to rise to the surface, because I know you've seen it with your clients and your patients. Mine one of the hardest things for me and the people out there listening is that you can get to a point with a patient where they are thriving. They're doing very well. Their vital force is really high. And you'll see them do well in like 3 months, no problem. There's two things that can happen on the most of the time is that if I have a 3-month checkup, they'll say, Doc, things are going really great. And then they say, but when I looked at the schedule and found out I was coming to see you, some of my symptoms came back. That's one. And I have to investigate that. Why does that happen? Literally, that happens quite a bit. Second is they're doing well. I don't see them for 6 to 8 months because they don't need to come in because they've had Epstein-Barr virus, Lyme and such, and their levels in their blood are really good. They're going lower and lower. And then they get a spike. And, you know, I used to try to be the solve-all and try to be like, oh, I know what's going on. And after the years, you just start to have to understand, like you were just saying, that when an infection beds down into the tissue and it gets comfortable, you do have to irritate it to get it to the surface. It's like, you know, I always try to say it's like the unwanted person in your life that, or a thing in your life where they're like, you know, they eat all my food. They stay here at my house for free. And you know what? No matter how many suggestions I give to the person, they never leave because they're just too comfortable because I treat them so well. And many of you guys are out there probably shaking your head going, yep, I know those kind of people.
It's Dupree. It's Dupree.
It is. So those are the two things. And I hope I'm not overtaking the conversation. Let's go through the questions. But we can go over those two types of scenarios too, because I think that not only can you get triggered, we're talking about the triggers, but can people trigger you? Most definitely. So, yeah.
Oh, that's a whole other conversation.
That's a whole other conversation.
Okay, I mean, we'll save that one for another day. But this is so good. And I want for you to clarify this because there's probably people listening. They're like, well, how do I know? Does everybody have these latent viruses? What do you see clinically that people should just be aware of? Like, do people have a lot of different, like if they have a virus or they have, you know, they say they have like strep or something. Now, do they forever have that? Like, is that something that they need like people have stuff in their childhood and they just assume, oh, well, I haven't had that in decades. Like that's not a threat. But I think we need to understand that our body's managing a lot more than we give it credit for because we don't experience the symptoms of an active virus or an infection. So maybe just clarify that. Like, what are the most common things that people probably have within their bodies because we've all been exposed at some point that you just need to be aware of because it can rear its ugly head at some point in your life based on a triggering event that you experience?
That's a good point. That's a good question. There are many different types of infections. And I think that it's a difference between when we grow up. And I want to preface it that if your parents, you know, there's some people I say that are granola, and I say that in the most respectful and loving way. But if your parents, you know, raised you to drink or eat and drink organic food and clean water, and they did give you herbs, because there are a few patients like that I have, and they've actually modified their immune system when they were very young. And when they got sick, they actually did take the herbs, and their parents gave them the things to actually eradicate the infection. So you don't find a lot of those infections that you commonly find in blood work or even in salivary testing that you normally would in the normal patient like myself. And when you usually get any type of bacterial infection, such as a strep or a staph, like if you remember, or your parents told you at a young age, they said, hey, you had strep throat like every year for 5 years in a row. You basically did not get rid of the strep. It was in the tissue, and it was just, like you said, triggered by an external environmental stressor that made it come to the surface. Now, those things such as strep and staph, H. pylori bacteria is a big one. E. coli, which gets in the gut and causes like diarrhea and such. Parasites, these are the ones you guys can write down, like Giardia lamblia, like you can get from lakes and city water and tap water. And other ones called leishmania, but those, we'll say that for another time. But viral infections like you were talking about, Court, I find that when you have adenoviruses, you know, when your kid gets up in the morning, and you guys know that who have kids, they're like, they get up, they used to have swollen lymph nodes and the little brown bumps behind their ears. That's adenovirus attacking the adenoids, the lymph glands behind your nose and above your mouth. If you have any type of enterovirus, which is a cold virus, parainfluenza. I know these are a lot to take in, but you can actually get these checked for. Like you can actually get these checked for in a normal blood work if you go to like LabCorp. mycoplasma bacteria and anaplasma. And I can make this list for you guys on the caption below, so you guys don't sit there and have to like wonder to write all this down. But those type of infections, Court, you're right. These are common ones. And you're like, all those are common, like Epstein-Barr virus. I mean, in the practice, you see them. I get so used to seeing them because it's like a daily thing. I see all these and I got used to the lingo. But these are the infections. If you remember when you're a kid, like I said, you had strep throat or you had chicken pox really bad, or you remember the time you had continuously had rashes or any type of eczema because of the strep or staph. Those normally don't go away unless you took good herbals or good vitamins and supplements to get rid of it. And the next question you just asked was a great one, Court. When we talk about, can you get rid of them? I myself have seen patients who have had things like such as Lyme disease and certain parasites, and using extensive labs from places overseas, like in South Africa, where they do really heavy testing at universities, and using medicinal juices, like literally juices made of herbs and fruits and vegetables in certain combinations, and literally go back and get all their blood work done, and they're completely clean. Not saying I did that. I'm saying other doctors have done, and people I've referred to. So can you clean your body out as you get older where you're not experiencing them? Yes, I've seen it. Can I say you're 100% gone? Well, the issue is you don't want all the memory of an infection to go away. Like, let's say, Court, you and I, if we had Epstein-Barr virus, if we had that, and I'm like, vaya con Dios, sayonara, like we don't have any more Epstein-Barr virus, then how in the world will the next time the Epstein-Barr virus comes and you counter it, your body's going to remember how to fix it? I mean, you're going to have some memory of it. So the body knows. It knows how much it needs to keep a memory of it. And so sometimes, the body gets kind of comfortable. And like you just said, it gets into the tissues, it gets into the cells, and you hit a little bump in the road and it comes back up. But I have seen lab numbers go down to near zero and near nil. But I think that's a good conversation we should have. We should find like a really good neurologist that can talk about infections and how your psyche brings it to service. And if those microbiologists, those immunologists ever find where it's ever eradicated, because those are the smart guys. They know, like, some of the stuff I read on those guys like passes over my head, but I hope that
I didn't even know that's a thing. So you're way further down the road.
No,
you're way deeper in the weeds.
It's so good. You got to read some of their stuff. It's just like, it literally is like the stuff down your alley. They're like, okay, you mean how I believe and how I picture things is how an infection will make my body respond by my psychology, like a certain trait. An infection can create a certain trait in you. It's really interesting.
Which is so interesting because as we're talking about triggers, the emotional piece now is coming up. Like we're like just scratching the surface, and one of probably a very large portion of whether or not you experience symptoms of reactivated viruses is your emotional state, and emotions can draw those things and reactivate them. So it's important to realize if you're going through something, say it's in a relationship, or maybe it's something with a child, like maybe you even have a child that's suffering, their suffering can then trigger something in you that now compromises your body enough where you actually take that on. Like your immune system is also now compromised and weakened to the point that you can't manage the viral load that is in your body. So it's crazy to think that, because sometimes we just think, well, it's got to be like a traumatic brain injury, like a car accident or something like that, something that's very physically jarring to the body, but it can be something that is related to emotional tension or stress. So evaluating some of that, I feel like, is a really important piece to your healing, because if you can't identify it, if you can't locate some of the areas, you may be still struggling with the same symptoms because your body is still fighting this emotional battle. Like you're not processing the emotions in a healthy way, which is going to allow your body to take on the space of healing. So emotions being one, let's talk about some really common events that people experience. And we were talking about this pre-show, but I've seen a lot of women recently that have had babies. So many of them already have children, but they're having their second, third, or fourth child. And within weeks postpartum, they're experiencing flares of autoimmune conditions. And they're not autoimmune conditions that were really pre-existing. Like we're seeing, I have friends that are dealing with rheumatoid arthritis, Raynaud's, and then elevated thyroid antibodies in Hashimoto's, which a lot of times, you'll see that pretty common in women anyway. But other autoimmune conditions that are triggered by pregnancy. What can you tell us about pregnancy, birth, and then postpartum? Why is it that during pregnancy we're okay, even getting through the birth? Like, what are some of the events that are happening that's dysregulating the immune system?
That's a good question, girl. I think that, because we can go through many angles. And I think people out there, when we talk about, you can look at the structural aspect or the biochemical, like that physical, and then you talk about organ relationship to your emotions. And I think that we could talk a lot on these. And I think it would be the best kind of combo. And that's why I'm glad we can tandem this. But when you talk about pregnancy, this is what I've seen. I try to be a nerd and look back at what we call like the steroid and hormonal steroid charts. And when you find a lady that's had a child, they are building up. And so gradually you build up, and the liver has a certain capacity to create lots of cholesterol. And your cholesterol is making your hormones like your testosterone, estrogen, progesterone. Now, when you are like you're about to have a baby or you're in the middle of it and you have the baby post, the hardest part is, like, let's say you have the baby. Now you've acclimated your body the whole time to create a certain amount of cholesterol, to create a certain amount of hormone to feed your child, because your child needs it. Depending on your genetics and your husband's, like, or the mate, you're going to try to create that much cholesterol to create that much hormone for your baby. The hardest part is that once you've given much of that hormone, because you remember your instincts in your body is to survive and reproduce. So you're going to give everything you got to that baby. After the fact that you've given all that, you've pretty much taken a lot of your cholesterol. In my opinion, what I've seen is that you've taken that cholesterol and shifted it to hormonal. But you, at times, if you're very tired and weak from prior infections that are hiding, probably have reduced the amount of the fighting capability of your liver or the cleansing capability of your liver to help you fight off the infections. So when you are at a low state, because you're in defense mechanism, because certain hormones are at higher and certain immune cells are higher, especially when you have the baby, when that drops, now the infections are like, well, I got room to get out of the cell or out of this tissue and move to another space to get more nutrients. So your liver is at a lower capacity, unless you've been taking good herbals and good vitamins and minerals to keep it strong. Because the majority of people are not taught that. And you know what I mean? When you're having a baby, they'll give you, here's a prenatal, take the prenatal, take some iron pills. And after you have the baby, we'll just take a couple other more prenatal pills, and that's it. So it's a matter of mountain defense. That's the biochemistry aspect. I hope that makes sense to everybody out there. It's like your body needs not only enough nutrients to build your immune cells in the middle of it, but actually after. It's even more important in postpartum. You have to have that. And the infections, which is pretty mind-blowing, is that if you remember before you had the baby, you had, I had the strep throat, or I had ear infections, or I had Epstein-Barr virus. The location that infection infected you heavily before you had the baby, do not be surprised if you'll have higher infection sites like rashes, swelling, lymph node in that area. Because your body now has to build up a defense. Why? You know what cholesterol is used for too, Court? I know you know this. I get all teachy. I'm sorry. But whenever you have cholesterol is always going to migrate to the area that has highest inflammation, because that's what cholesterol does. It's literally helps patch up your cells. If you had cells infected with like Babesia parasite, like Lyme or Epstein-Barr virus, your body has a choice. It's like, yo, I got to help this lady here build up more hormones so she actually can get up and thrive. Or I have to go fight the infection and help the liver do it. So you're in this little this quandary. You don't know which one you're going to do. And that's why when you talk about the triggers, like before, during, and after, that's a big aspect of it. Now, I hope that makes sense to the people listening. So you have to build up your immune and get your mitochondria and your liver cleansing and build up your body's energy systems during this whole time. That's why the triggers will come, in my opinion. I've seen patients that literally, like you said, would tell me something to this extent. I've had rashes around my mouth for the years. And right when I got pregnant, it went away. This is another cool thing, right? Now, rashes around the mouth and dry lips are always associated with complete spleen issues. Those patients always have spleen issues. If everybody listen, if you have it, lymph nodes, spleen, Epstein-Barr virus, and old chronic mono, usually is what I find. Then they get pregnant and then it goes away. There's talk that your brain actually chooses priority. It goes, the baby's more important than me having memory or thought about this infection in my spleen. So your immune system and your hormones are regulating to go towards the baby instead of worrying about the infection that's in my stomach or my spleen. So it pulls all the inflammatory agents away from my lips. So I don't experience it because the baby's more important. So you see that like when you have an infection come up, you're like, my body is choosing psychologically things that are more priority than what I'm experiencing right now. And I hope that wasn't too much, but that's where biochemistry starts to make a really good leeway into your psychology, your emotions of it. Yeah. Let's say you said, okay, and I hope I'm not overstepping when we go into the emotional aspect. Maybe we're jumping the gun, but after you have the baby and you have a certain form of genetic material, which is half your genetics and half the mate's genetics in your baby, and that baby has experienced some kind of trauma in their life. Now, this is really interesting to me. If you are starting to feel and have some form of trigger in you, this is how deep the studies go. They say that the baby has a certain amount of capacity to mount up an immune response to a certain infection. But remember, the mate's half is in there too. Now, the crazy thing is that during gestation period, you have created enough change in your chromosomes and DNA. Yeah. Let's say you had a bad relationship with your mate, and your body was mounting a defense against the mate. The child comes out and experiences a trauma that reminds their genetic material, which is your half, of their problem, of the mate. Like you had a problem with somebody always arguing at you. Your little baby hears somebody arguing, and it mounts her DNA, the baby's defense, just in defense of the mother, because the mother experienced it, because you resonate with the kid. And so you get triggered because you resonate with them. I mean, that's frequency. Like I don't care how far they are, you're going to resonate with them. And it makes your DNA change in response to the kid. So postpartum, you can have the kid going through something. Oh, little Billy went to school and he went to somebody that reminded them of the trauma the mother went through. And then the mother's like, I feel super sick. That's the psychological aspect of it. So you can take all the herbs and stuff in the world, and don't get me wrong, you're going to mount your immune defense and it helps. But what I'm so adamant about is like, you have to understand your psychology and just understand like my kid's going through it too. And then when you start to see like, here's my biochemistry, here's the hidden infections. I could have handled it from the past, but all these things are to make me pull it up to the surface. So I went through all that to say, sorry, Court, that when you start to see how much it's all intertwined about your belief systems, it's very, very eye-opening to know that triggers are brought about by your belief system. So what do you believe in? That's another question. That's another podcast. But I think I went overboard on that one, everybody out there. But no, I just had to tell you what I thought.
That was a lot. I mean, I haven't ever thought of it like that. I mean, but it is interesting, right? Because I think that many of us get frustrated with our health, but even in natural medicine, we talk about root cause. And I think that we can a lot of times find things like a nutritional deficiency or a toxin or something like that. But there are certain people that still can't get well despite doing SpectraCell, micronutrients, and gut pathogen testing and all of this stuff, or the pathogens keep coming back, or like you said, like they go through cycles where they're a little bit better and then they get worse again. They get better and then they get worse again. And it gets to be mentally kind of defeating. But what I'm trying to help us understand here is if you just zoom out even a little bit bigger, you can start to see how some of the influences of the relationships in your life and the environment and the experiences that you have are contributing to the way that you feel and the way that your body's responding, because you may not think you're in a stressful situation. You may not think that you're affected by your child having a bad day, but you are connected and you are taking a lot of that on. I know that, especially after birthing 3 children, and then this last one being, the most recent. So it's more top of mind to me, but there have for sure been a number of times where I have felt okay, but then after being with Marley for, an hour or two where she's just like really emotionally unstable, whether it's her teeth, whatever it is, she's just restless. She's uncomfortable. I start to feel not that great. And I realize most people will be like, well, yeah, nobody wants to be around a fussy baby, but it's more than that because I'm her mom. And so you start to take on some of that. And if you don't and then you, I mean, just think like most people have more than, they'll have 2 children or 3 children, and then they have a spouse, or they have family members. So you're living in this dynamic situation where things are always changing around you. But if you can't ever identify the places that are influencing the way that your body feels, I'm not saying you have to cut everybody out, but if we're not aware of it, then we may get caught in these cycles where we're constantly feeling like we're run down. We're constantly feeling like we're fighting the same things. And so it's worth doing some of that. I feel like I was on like another podcast recently, and I have always remembered this. When I interviewed Dr. Caroline Leaf, I remember her saying something that was so important. She mentioned how anytime she works on a child, or anytime she is counseling parents for a child's like nervous system, just their overall like mental health, she said, I don't ever want to start treating the child, because I cannot help the child without helping the caregivers, without helping the parents. Like, they're the ones, that's where the healing starts. If I can get them healing, then the child will start to experience the overflow of that healing. But I cannot help the child get past a certain point without addressing what the child is being guided and mentored under. Like, what
That's
type
a good
of
point.
And so, that stuck with me, because I thought, you're right. Like, I think a lot of times we put our own bodies in a silo and think, okay, here's my personal protocol. Here's my regimen. This is what I do in my lane. But we are always doing life in community and in relationship with others. So if you are not addressing, this is why I see a lot of people in marriages and relationships and families where you've got a lot of dysfunction, right? You never see one really, really healthy person in a family living under the same roof with a bunch of dysfunctional people, because eventually the healthy person gets drawn down. The healthy person becomes the fuel tank, and the fuel tank begins to start to lower and lower and lower until there's nothing left, right? You just don't see it. Why? Because all of these relationships are connected. Like, you are actually depositing and taking from other people all the time. Those exchanges are always happening. And if they are not healthy exchanges, somebody's withdrawing, and they're not depositing back into you, you're going to start to see dysfunction flare up. People's health will start to decline. May look like mental health at first, but just like Dr. Motley said, the mental health is connected to the physical health. Like, it starts to change the way that you think. It starts to change the way that you respond, even on a subconscious level. So it's really important that we understand these triggers, because if you're dealing with something like Lyme, or you're dealing with cytomegalovirus, or you're like, gosh, I just can't get these viruses, I need to take more immune support. Look like a little bit broader, like, just expand the way that you're looking at it, because you may not be in a house of healing. You may be in an incubator for disease. Like, your home may be an infirmary. Like, it may be a hospital, but it's harboring illness, not harboring wellness. It's not a hospital of healing. It's not a place of healing. So I don't know. We kind of went like super deep on that, but
no, I mean, it's like an agar plate. Like, when they teach you in biology class, remember you sort of put, the bacteria and help it grow. I mean, like, your house becomes like an agar plate of like triggers. And I think that's a good point, though. I think that when you said, when Carolyn Leaf, when you're talking about like when you see your kid and you want your kid to feel better, it's one of those aspects in your psychology where the kid is not meaning to be a trigger to you, but it's like you don't want them to go through the same pains, and their pains and their reactions can be a trigger to you, where it's an indicator to you that you need some healing. And the only way you may look positively upon your kid's healing is if you change your psychology. Yeah. Because you see it all the time. It's like some people are so worried about their kids, and all they ever do is they always see the bad. And I'm like, well, you're not going to see the good unless you get your body healed. And I loved it when you talked about like the triggers, like if a postpartum or during a pregnancy, somebody has rheumatoid arthritis or vitiligo, you start to see that those expressions where those infections come to the surface, yes, in my opinion, they're intertwined with a certain types of infections from experience, but it's also that the area that they come up on in is also an indication of how their brain perceives reality. And like we talked about it before we got on here, we were talking about vitiligo and vitiligo. Like, why would a pregnant lady who just had a baby experience vitiligo? Well, if you look at like in German New Medicine and even like in certain studies, they say that vitiligo is basically a skin, the epidermal layer, which has lots of melanocytes, which produce your melanin that gives you a tan, which Courtney looks very tan today. She's been outside. That's great. Peptides and tan. But you know, what would trigger that to come up after a baby was born? Well, your epidermis layer has your melanocytes, your keratinocytes. And so what does your skin do? It's protection. It's defense. It's holding a baby close to you. It's keeping somebody close to you in your life. And when something is torn away from you, that means part of your cell layers on your skin is also torn away. So your body responds in the same way. So if the baby was taken away from you too early because the baby was maybe a NICU, or if you were like saying, okay, this baby had to do like C-sections, we talked about that. Could that express itself with the skin responding psychologically? Now, can that issue be associated with an infection in that person's history? You better believe it, because the patterns are showing all the areas of the skin that were probably injured in the past but never expressed itself. So that's when you go into the aspect of looking into the person's infection. So when a person comes in the office, Court, it's not like, oh, you've got adenovirus and you've got Epstein-Barr virus. It's like, yes. Why did it express itself in that manner? Now, you do want to clean out the infections as much as it can, so it's not like causing a detriment. But the patterns of how it's expressed itself after a person has a baby or during the pregnancy gives me an indication of like, okay, this is the psychology behind it. And could it keep repeating itself if you didn't take care of the psychology? Yes. Can we clean the body? And this is like what I like to do. Clean the infection to where you reduce the amount of the infection to where that infection doesn't trigger you any further, because infections can be triggers after a while as well. So, I mean, and we're complex beings. I mean, now you're talking about cleaning out the infections as much as possible so the body doesn't keep getting reminded. And that's one aspect of why everybody's talking about, let's clear all the parasites. Let's clear all the Epstein-Barr virus. Let's clear all the staph. Does that really change your psychology? It may be very hard to change your programming, but I think what it does is it reduces the amount of the infections to where you have freed up memory, data bank in your brain to go, okay, 70% of that Epstein-Barr virus is gone. I have enough capacity now to actually take into the fact that I had trauma from my father when I was like 7 years old, something like that. And now when you start to see those patterns come up, people get defeated. And that's what happens when they start to see something come up like, oh, I have a trigger. I had Lyme disease. It was great for 2 years. And all of a sudden I had this little trigger. Well, there's probably a batch of it somewhere in the body, but your body somehow wanted to bring that up to the surface. Maybe because you now have the free space in your RAM memory to face why it held on to it. That's what I like to think about. And that's what I like to believe in when I treat patients. There may be many more angles, and people out there probably could agree or disagree, but that's why we always like people to give us comments, because we need to know. But those are some clear indicators for me, like triggers. We could go into triggers, go like about even like EMF fields, and we can talk about its effect on you, or dental areas like, bad teeth. You could do like you just said, being in a house where it's just full of really bad energy. Those are triggers. So there's many things we can talk about. Keep talking on this podcast about it.
This is what I just thought of this, but this is why it is so important that if and when, because we will all experience the byproduct of these viruses, infections, things like that. Like we just said, this is a part of our life. Like we do not go through life in the absence of illness or disease. Like it's out there. Our bodies are not perfect, and the world is full of different environmental trigger. I mean, so many things that can compromise our health, but this is why it's so important that we do not identify with a specific condition. We do not start to label ourselves as, well, it's the Lyme again. It's, I'm just, I've got all these infections, I got all these gut infections, I'm always full. I mean, I'm laughing because I say this. I'm laughing because I tell Chris this often. I'm like, oh, my gut, my parasites. But again, I am securing the fact that they're there. I'm coming into agreement with it, right? This could go, you could take this in so many different directions, but what I want you to think about is, what are you coming into agreement with? that you wish, like if ultimately you don't want it to be there, right? You want to feel your best, but it has become the place that you operate from. You don't know yourself outside of the wounded, hurt, and diseased state that you identify with. You resonate with it. So if that is the case, then why would we think that our bodies would ever overcome that? Because our psychology has programmed us to identify with it. Like that is a part of how we see ourselves as somebody that suffers Hashimoto's. I've got Hashi's, I got, diabetes, it's like we could go in so many directions with that, but it is really important that we realize, one, where this is coming from. Like, why did this trigger happen? And it's not anything we need to be overwhelmed by. I mean, I told you I just got a cold sore. I'm like, okay, the herp is coming out again. Like what stressful event? And it did. Like I looked around that time frame and I had like several things go on that week that I was not expecting. And I even thought in my mind, like, I'm probably gonna get a cold sore because I wasn't feeling good. I knew that I was like probably getting a cold. I wasn't sleeping well. Sure enough, I got a cold sore. But all that to say, like just being able to see the pattern, see the triggers, supporting yourself and evaluating the right pieces of the puzzle that are contributing to that coming out. And again, like you said, it's not about it just going away forever, but it's about realizing that, hey, this is something that's there. This is something my body is managing. And I need to make sure that mentally I'm in a position where I'm not going to drive or exacerbate the condition, because that's not what I ultimately want, but it is how a lot of times we live our lives. Like it is kind of crazy. The people that complain the most about being busy, like I want to be like, and listen, I'm not saying this in any way of like condemnation, but it's like you have control of your schedule. Like you could say no, like no is an option, right? But how many of us do that? I do it all the time. I'm like, I'm so busy. I'm so tired. I'm so stressed out. And it's like, sometimes I'm like, what am I doing? I did not have to choose all of this, but I did. And now I'm complaining. It's like, we live in these toxic patterns. Sometimes we need somebody to kind of like smack us in the face and be like, listen, you're making this harder for yourself. So this is what this conversation's here for.
I love it. No, it's good. It's like, you're saying like how your body can, we don't realize that we can set our bodies up to be triggered. Like we can definitely set up and it's, like you said, like you've had a cold sore and you said, I knew I was going to have a cold sore. I was doing some eye movement therapy with a neurologist chiropractor. And, they were saying that I had patterns in my right part of my brain that were probably damaged by the Lyme disease. Like I had a lot of Babesia and Bartonella. But my eyes, I hope this makes sense to everybody out there, but my eyes got damaged in that optic area, in this area that my eyes, because your eyes are pretty much neurological tissue. They're just mirrors of your brain. That if my eyes didn't want to track over to that area of my brain when they watched my eye movement, because that area of my brain was damaged. So my eyes did not want to track evenly up to the upper right. Everywhere else, it's fine. But even on the scans, it's like that area there. I was like, that's where I had all the infection. I know because it hurts so bad right there. So after my treatment and therapy, I started to feel like, I've gotten rid of my Lyme. Everything's good. I'm great. And then I'm doing computer work and Court knows what I'm doing. I'm doing like tax work and I'm looking from my left side of my screen up to the right with just my eyes. And I felt something move right down the side of my head. And I went, that kind of felt like I did when I had Lyme. So I went back and I said, you know what? I wonder if I hit a batch of toxins. So I did my own biofeedback scanning. And you know what I found was not necessarily presence of a lot of Babesia. I found toxicity of like they have different type of toxins that those infections give. And I found it all right here. I still had a program running that my body was probably still hiding because it was protecting me, thinking I was protected from the infection. But that eye movement initiated that area to wake up. And finally, I recognized it. Does that make sense? Like I actually looked at it and went, yeah, no, that's a problem. And when you're saying like there's that way of you going, you can identify with it and stay stuck. And then there's also that other aspect of like, I'm going to avoid it because it can go away. And people say, which one goes first? And you go, well, I'm with you. I don't want to walk around because I could have gone, oh man, I have toxins and there's all this and this. And to me, it was a learning experience. I went, oh, the reason I reacted that way is because I was so damaged and injured by that infection and that psychology that now any any encounter with trauma usually follows the same pattern of programming of response. So I could get like a cold and feel the same way. But I'm with you, Court. I think that whenever we start to look into our triggers, we know that things could be there and it's a journey. I always tell people when they work with me, I'm like, hey, this is a journey and we're going to get to where hopefully your numbers are down near zero. That's what I want to do. But I'm also like not discouraged when I find something like that, because like you just said, I go, did I, put myself through hard times and made myself work overtime to get that fatigued? Yeah.
Yeah.
But now I look at it and go, okay, how do I work with it? I do understand though, Court, like when people are out there, and I know you see them too, is like people go, oh my goodness, I've had Lyme disease for so long and parasites. I'm just over it. I don't want to take another pill. I don't want to take another tincture. I don't even look at anything about that. And I get that because I see it every day with my patients. And you do too. You see people talk to you about it, but you once you find the right like combinations of different types of not only like herbals and things of that sort, you find the right people around you, you find the right environment, you find the right spiritual life, you start getting healthier. You're going, oh, motivated. I may not feel great, but I'm kind of still motivated. Yeah. And I think that's a big thing when we encounter triggers, because now what are we seeing? Like, we could talk about this. Like you could be doing really well. And then, your body goes, okay, I'm doing really well. And all of a sudden you get into this whole realm of them putting 5G out here and maybe even 6G, and your body never even experienced it before. It's like, I don't even know what that is. And all of a sudden your cells get activated, and then now it becomes a breeding ground for mold, which could have been in your body. You had no problem with. Hear how high voiced I got? But it's the truth. It's like, oh, here we go. And then your body has to go, I have to adapt to that too. And that's part of life that gets me sometimes. And in court, it's like, you can be around somebody that just has the worst attitude. You can be great, and you're like, I'm handling this. I'm handling parasites. I'm doing this great. And all of a sudden you get around somebody that's like, hey, how are you doing? And you're like, I'm triggered. Triggered pretty bad.
I'm triggered by negative attitudes. So
the negativity. So I know, I hope everybody out there is listening. Me and Court so we just start talking about this stuff. But I mean, there's so many things. I know. Did we go over time? I hope no. Like
I think this is a good. I think we hopefully started to unpack some things, or at least just. I mean, I know that these conversations always get me thinking. Like, for you guys listening, we, Dr. Motley and I talk a little bit like pre-show, and we always kind of have like a game plan a little bit, but then we just kind of game plan. Yeah, but it's like it just kind of, the conversation just ends up going wherever it goes. But it also is like, it's so good because it gets me thinking about things that I had never thought of. But I know that for somebody that's like, man, I'm in that cycle, I feel like I can't get better. And you've gone down the rabbit trail of all the herbs and all the supplements and all the therapies. And it may be that they are helping, but honestly, until your body decides that it's ready to start processing some of these, like you were just talking about, there may be a lot of things that your body chooses to sequester in certain areas because it doesn't feel strong enough to be able to pull that out and deal with it. Yep. And a lot of that is a heart issue. Like, you have to deal with your heart. Like, in scripture, it talks about guard your heart with all diligence, for from it are the sources of life. So it goes so deep. Like, if you just feel like, I am so frustrated and upset with all the money and the time I've spent and I just can't seem to get well, I would tell you, my recommendation would be try fasting for a little bit. Because if you are unsure of where some of the emotional stuff is, and this is just from my experience, one of the easiest ways to figure it out is to start fasting. Because when you start denying your flesh of the things that it wants, guess what comes out? The emotions. And the emotions that start to come to the surface, and you'll know it because you'll be all hangry and irritated, but the things will start to surface to your mind that you need to deal with. And that has set me free in a lot of ways, because I think when we get compromised, we get discouraged, and it becomes really hard for us to see what the real issue is. And until you can really take the lid off and just start the flow of everything coming out, you'll start to think like, okay, well, I'm just irritated with this person, and I'm irritated with this boss, and I'm irritated that my kids are acting this way. Like, it will be about everybody else. Okay. We all know nobody else is responsible for your emotional healing other than you. So you have to be able to take accountability and responsibility, but that can't happen when you can't see it. The scales have to fall off your eyes to see it. Sometimes we have to deny our very flesh of something to expose the emotions that are buried so deep that we can't even see. So if I was to give you a strategy, we'll do a part 2 and we'll talk about like other, remedies and things like that. But for this conversation, and you can add anything you want to this, Dr. Motley, but I feel like if you are you feel like you're like the gears are locked in place and you're not making any movement, just try fasting. See what comes up. You may need to send the rest of the family out because you might really not be in a good, you may bring that negative energy, but it's good. Lean into it. Like that's where it is. I'm telling you, you'll start to see where the bitterness comes from. You'll start to see where the insecurities are rooted. And that stuff is valuable because once you can see it, now you can repent of it. Now you can release it. Now it's not holding you bondage anymore. Like it's not there. There's not a strong hold on you. You can address it. So anyway, I don't know. We just really.
That was good. I love it. I mean, I think that, yes, I can't add much more. I know the people out there listening, we talk about triggers. The next video, we can talk about, we can go through a quick list of basic triggers and things that we can see to help fix it up. But I think what Court and I were saying is like she just said is like doing a fast. We just want you to be encouraged because like when you have a trigger and you're thinking, why am I always triggered? Yes, you can always, and I've seen it. You need to work on, getting your body cleaned up, healing, which could help you with your perspective of life and help you to see your life in a more healthy way. But we just don't want you out there to be discouraged and forget the emotional aspects of the triggers, because that to me is probably one of the biggest things that you could ever push away. And we don't want you to push that away because, when something keeps coming back at you, it is how you probably were programmed to view it. Unfortunately, but in the next video, we'll chat about some of the stuff we touched lightly on today. But when Court and I get together, it's like exciting times. So we had to vent it out, when we get to talk with each other. Yeah. So, Court, the next video, let's do that. We'll talk about some remedies. I think about when you said about fasting, I always love how God made your cells. It's like what happens on the macro happens on the micro. It's like if you deny yourself food, they even say your cells will start doing what? Eating up all the toxins, removing the toxins in your life. That's what happens when you start fasting. Right. You start getting rid of all the toxicities and you're like, oh, I can actually thrive when I get all this old stuff out of my life. So this is good. Good. I mean, you want me to do the outro? You do the outro. You're better at the outro.
Oh, well, I think you're good at outros too. I mean,
all right. Well, okay, guys, Court and I are going to do another part after this, but for you guys, if you guys like the content here, when we talk about emotions, we talk about emotional triggers and even psychological program, please give us a comment. Give us a note. Let us know what you think about this type of episode and if it's something that you enjoy, because we just want to give out content that helps you. From all of us here at Ancient Health Podcast, we really care about you. We love you. And if you like when me and Court get on here, just like and subscribe. And until the next time, this is my lovely co-host, Organic Blondie, and I'm Dr. Motley. Ciao.
Bye, guys.